I can always hear you, Director Searchme.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you, and I hear Patty, and I hear Susan, and we're. Okay. And there's Director Emerson. Hi, John. How are you? It's good to see you this evening.
Great.
Sue, you sound like, what was the name of that preschool show? That
Wanda.
I see.
Romper Room.
Romper Room.
Yeah, right. Well, Romper Room did too. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Sharon was just on. She was having technical issues, and so she's left, and she's coming back in a minute.
I can use the extra minute, so that's okay.
You only got 40 more seconds, Maureen.
And we are live on YouTube.
Coming back in a minute.
Yeah, we are live on YouTube, everybody.
I can use the extra minute, so that's okay.
She keeps talking about this minute. I don't think she realizes.
Thank you, Patty and Susan, for doing a double check.
So I'm a little concerned about that minute comment because that was a kickback of what I'd already said. So we'll see. Hopefully I'm not echoing.
Oh.
I think someone had theirs off mute and they were watching the stream, so I think it's fine.
Oh, just delayed. Okay. Thanks,
man. Yourself over and over again.
Yeah. No, I just got off TSBC, so I was taking a minute to do a reset. And it is 5 o'clock. Welcome, everyone. Is everybody here? I'm trying to do a quick. Sharon, are you able to join us? Are you there? Did we lose Sharon? Yeah.
I think she just got booted.
She's been having difficulty hearing, so I think she's been popping in and out trying to reset her system.
Okay, I'm going to give Sharon 1 more minute, and then just out of respect of time, I hate to do that, but we'll go ahead and get started.
I'll work with Patty to make sure she's on.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Okay, well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started, and hopefully Sharon will pop back on quickly. So welcome everyone to the Tigard-Tualatin Board's work session. This evening, we are really happy to have John and Tara back with us, but now I'm looking, is Tara here, John? Jill, Emily, I'm scanning my columns.
She should be here in just a moment.
Okay. Well, I think what I'd like to do as we try to get reset, this is really important work for us. What the process will be with John and Tara is to kind of review the framework that John had put together and really talk about what as a board is critical for us prioritizing these next 6 months, maybe through the end of the school year, or what really needs to be looked towards the next year as the strategic plan is kind of on a reset. So that's what our hope is. So I think what would be good for the board and Rowan and Emily to join us is to look to Art Community as we always do as we start our work and get grounded in which of the components of Art Community that you want to focus on this evening. And I will let Emily and Rowan start. And I would say we go in reverse age order, but that might put me last. So anyway, Rowan and Emily, why don't you go ahead and get us started with your focus tonight on Art Community.
I'll go first. We strive to be in community with one another with care.
We slow down so we have time to think and reflect. Would you like me to pick somebody to go next, or?
I love that, Emily. Thank you for that idea.
Okay, Director Wolf then.
Actually, I think what Rowan just said, and see, I'm trying to find about we slow down so we have time to think and reflect is, I think, the space that I need to be with this important work. And with that, Director Zerchmead is right above me, so I will hand it off to, and it looks like Sharon has joined us, so that's great.
So I would also choose we slow down so we have time to think and reflect. And that's because this is a work session, and that is traditionally when we do have time to slow down and think and reflect and be a little bit more thoughtful than we can be in a regular board meeting where things have to move along. I'm going to say next is Director Emerson.
Tonight, I am remembering that conversation is a natural way we learn and think together. Because we will be thinking and learning. So Director Bowman.
Is Ben gone?
Of course, I meant Director Fox.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure why, but my sound is kind of coming and going. So bear with me if I don't hear you. Yes, so I think slow down. So we have time to think and reflect amidst the technology failures. And also I just want to add that my one that I really want to do is remember that conversation is a natural way we think together.
So two things. So I want to welcome Eddie, and Eddie, I will get that in my routine that you have now joined us from Creekside. So welcome. And I am concerned that Ben is off the call because I don't see him. I see Tara. Hi, welcome, Tara. So Eddie, what we do, this is the art of community, and these are the components of how we work together as a community. So as you read through that list that's been shared by Director Unn, is there one that sticks out to you that you'd like to share will be your focus as we do this work session?
Well, for me, I like the last one that says we will listen with intention to learn something new. I've always never really in my life, I've never really listened. So that's something that I'm actually working on right now is listening and cause I like learning new things. I like knowing more about the world, and so for me, learning new things is very important at the moment, especially with work and school. That's something that really stands out for me.
Well, Eddie, I appreciate your honesty, and I think a lot of adults can reflect on their abilities to listen. So I appreciate you sharing that. And oh my gosh, Ben's internet just went out, but Ben said he's back on with his phone.
Yep, I'm here now. Sorry, everyone. I'm on my cell phone.
Well, sorry about that. Ben, did you want to share Art of Community, and then we'll hand it off to John and Tara?
Yes, for me, we will listen with intention to learn something new.
Perfect. And Cabinet and Dr. Ricky Smith, certainly be thinking in your mind, I know you are, on where you are with the Art of Community, but given our time, I'll go ahead and direct to John and Tara. So thank you.
I think I'll begin on behalf of me and Tara. So thank you, Director Wolf, for passing it on to us. So what we'd like to do is begin by sharing some of the themes that we heard from our interviews, our individual interviews with board members, and then kind of move towards kind of the big pieces of work, some of the goals and the work ahead for you in terms of priorities, and then have enough time for you to talk about what really are your priorities. and have some discussion and dialogue. And the time will go so fast. So Tara, did you want to add anything before we jump into what we heard in our meetings with individual board members?
Other than to say good evening to everyone, I will let you go ahead and get started, John.
Okay, so we identified several themes, and the first one is that when we met with you, what we heard were actually your stories, your individual and very personal stories of your learning and experiences of oppression and your vulnerability and your growth around equity work and anti-racism. And that was really deep and personal and meaningful and so important in your work. And then a second theme is really
Shoot, is that just me or is it John?
No, it's John. Hey, John, if you can hear us, maybe try turning off your camera while you're talking. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. What John and I did is we went through our notes from the interviews and our conversations with each of the board members and, excuse me, came up with some of those main themes to share. And so I'll just read some of them for you. So the themes that emerged as real focus or areas of concern and wanting to dive into more, let's see, supporting closing the gaps in academic achievement with more attention to lived experience, socio-emotional belonging and hostility, these different things that our students may be facing. Recognizing that there's a larger and potentially growing, I don't want to say divide, but definitely difference in Tigard and Tualatin, and having to navigate that just with how the population of Tualatin is, how the populations are changing and just navigating that. There was definitely an interest in as a board getting on the same page and getting to action in some of the areas that you guys have identified as high priority. Also just within the board, a desire to improve working relationships and build more trust with each other. There were a number of you who expressed a need for more data, measurements, and evidence overall and for the equity work. And along with that, there was great appreciation for Director Unn's leadership and the work that she and other administrators are doing around equity, as well as an appreciation for the work in student affinity groups, student voice, and family voice. But along with that, there were questions about wanting to do more in terms of really understanding and being able to define the metrics connected to the benefit and the outcomes of that work. So there was definitely an appreciation and recognition of the value, but just at a higher level, making sure that it could be communicated community-wide in terms of measurement and tracking. Also, there was support for work of culturally responsive teaching and questions about how to deepen and sustain and measure the work. And concern that the current instruction does not have all aspects or perspectives, sorry. There was clear support for clear goals, strategies, and measurements. There was concern around COVID disproportionately harming students, families, and staff of color, and also just the online learning environment in the time of COVID and how it has and may continue to exacerbate inequities in access. We also noted an interest in strategies from SEL, mental health, resiliency, school culture, climate, SSA, and all of these different areas being incorporated into board plans moving forward. And of course, the ongoing interest in addressing harassment and bullying. There were across the board requests for more learning and training. Specifically, we noted definitions and common understanding of terms and concepts. And this is specifically related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Frameworks, history, understanding and dissecting public education, privilege, anti-racism, and digging deeper and dealing with uncomfortable conversations. There was conversation around, kind of what are the priorities for the board and how do we hold ourselves accountable for these priorities? And I'm saying our, but really meaning the board members. There was also interest in diversifying the board, and we really were able to talk about it in different details and aspects of that. So for example, recruiting potential board members, coaching, and then mentoring, and also understanding the current culture of the board and the possibility of changing in the sense of just making it more inclusive, more inviting and accessible to others. And this wasn't talked about in terms of somebody wanting to do it, but just the things that are on the table to discuss and understand more about in terms of diversifying the board is increasing the number of board members. Let's see, in a few.
I'm back, just so you know, I'm back.
Okay.
So continue on.
Okay, and some of the last few themes that we identified: systemically collaborate with families and community as a board, and support district development of metrics for the working in collaboration with families of color. So I mentioned that before with Director Unn's work. There are questions of how do we build community with students? And also just dealing with this new environment, this new completely virtual environment as a board. How do we create the conditions for honest, vulnerable, and courageous conversations when everything is so public? And you think about that also in terms of team building and working together and building those relationships. There was also talk about, like, especially through this work, how to build strategies and prepare for a backlash and pushback from those opposed to racial equity work. The development of your own tools, protocols, and frameworks for doing this work. A couple of last things that came up: addressing policy issues, including pay to play for fees for student participation in different activities. And last but not least, how do we create that space for learning and honest dialogue, particularly around this DEI work that you're doing a deeper dive into? John, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I think you got it. And
are there any questions? Oh, sorry, John.
Well, and unfortunately, Tara and I are the ones who benefited so much from these sessions. We learned so much, and so we're trying to capture everything that we learned in about 10 minutes. But what you shared, your histories and your issues and your intentions, were very deep and meaningful. In a certain sense, we wish you could have listened to each other. But anyway, we had that privilege, so thank you for that.
Yeah, and something else I would add to that too is just the thoughtfulness behind these issues, because what you don't capture for me, just kind of reciting a list of themes, is how these things were shared with us. I've been in spaces where leaders or directors would share this information, but it's very much from a I perspective, their position, their perspective. But there was an openness to recognizing that this is a community that you're serving and there are multiple perspectives and multiple needs. And I felt like that was often represented in even how you presented these issues and how you're thinking about them. And so I just, for me, that was a treasure to be able to hear and experience and be able to follow up and ask more questions about with you all to see how you're really considering community in your decision making.
And from that, we tried to capture what was most important for you all in terms of moving forward, in terms of next steps. And so we identified a draft, and we call it potential scope of work. And this is the work that you would do as a board, but also potentially that Tara and I could have a role in supporting and facilitating some of this work. And so we came up with 5 different components in this potential scope of work. And I think I'll speak to the first one. Tara, should we just keep moving forward?
Yes.
Okay, so the first element in the scope of work really is to develop and transform the board culture. Knowing that your focus on equity and racial equity and the work of the district and partnering with students and families, especially students and families of color and students who have been underserved, that it requires some shifts and changes in the culture. So some of the pieces of that would be to work more on building trust and relationships and improving communication among board members, kind of developing those conditions and parameters for honest, uncomfortable, and courageous conversations, knowing that this can be very challenging in public space, but finding a way to do that. And then strengthening the collaboration and partnerships with students, families, and communities, so that there are some systemic ways for students, families, and community members to engage and participate with the board. And then to create a even more welcoming and inclusive culture to support new members and diverse members and board members of color and other underrepresented groups who you want to outreach to and include and support in joining and becoming a part of the board. So that's trying to capture that whole piece around board culture. And some of this is ongoing work. So some of this can get started right away, but some of this is work that takes a year or 2, sometimes 3 years. But we wanted to put it together, kind of capturing your words and putting it into a goal in this scope of work.
The next aspect of work that we listed was board learning focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. And starting off with developing a deep and shared understanding of key concepts. And moving beyond that, really working to increase a contextual knowing and understanding of DEI and anti-racism in the context of your schools and communities that you're serving. So deepen the understanding of the experiences of underserved students and family, looking at the historical context of things as well as what we're currently seeing. Support personal growth and understanding culture, identity, positionality, privilege, and responsibility. And lastly, increase understanding of systemic and structural racism and other forms of oppression. The next area is the potential of equity coaching. So either one-on-one coaching with a board member and John or I, or group coaching to respond to emerging issues. So this would provide opportunity to process, understand, and respond through an equity lens, as well as support personal growth in terms of learning and unlearning. A huge part of this work, especially when we're talking about transformational change, I always say, it's important that, we read and take advantage of the different media offerings to increase our knowledge. But the huge part of this work is processing in community. The work happens in community, so we can't just go and silo ourselves and learn everything we need to know and be ready. It's the sharing of perspective and information and challenging ourselves in that way. And so that's what coaching provides in a more one-on-one or smaller group if that's what's necessary. The next section is develop board goals focused on equity and inclusion. These may include diversifying the board, review and develop equity-focused policies, create systems and structures for partnering with students, families, and communities, especially those who have been marginalized and underrepresented. Now, this area it's less, these are more, opportunities based on some of the themes that we shared And ultimately, it would be up to you all to decide where exactly you want to focus, and we could just put some specific attention to that, going deeper in whichever of those areas, or if there are other areas that aren't listed here that you're particularly interested in as a group. And John, do you want to go ahead and do the last offering?
The last one, and the board is already doing this, but we talked about gaining even more clarity in identifying board priorities for your involvement and support for the school district goals and strategic plans, in terms of your role, in terms of your participation, in terms of your encouragement and support. And so actually prioritizing specific district goals and objectives and initiatives that you really want to be engaged with, and clarifying the board's role in relation to the school district's priorities and the school district's strategic plan and equity work. And then, you know, how do you as a board in this process provide accountability? How can the board be accountable for these priorities that the district has set that also then become board priorities? And so that's what we're kind of moving into, is, you know, in terms of what are your priorities as a board in terms of your work, but also what are your priorities in terms of supporting and being engaged with the work of the school district. So we've done a lot of talking. Mostly Tara. I disappeared for a few moments there. But we would like to hear from you and communicate with each other around what did you hear, and based on what you've heard and where you're headed with the work of the board around equity and racial equity, what's emerging for you as most important? What are your priorities? And this is more of a brainstorm rather than a decision making, but this becomes the basis for your continuing work and your next steps. And Director Wolf, should we defer to you to call upon people?
You know, I was just going to say, I will just open it up on whoever is ready with your thoughts. If you guys want a second and you want me to kick off, I'm happy to do that. But if somebody's ready to jump in what they're thinking, I know it's a lot. So first of all, I want to say thank you to John and Tara for kind of collecting all our thoughts, being with us over this last month or so, and then really kind of putting it into a framework for us. But it's a lot to process, I think, and then to also think about what could we accomplish in 6 months by the end of the year, or what really rolls into strategic thinking into that next 5-year plan, and what muscle are we building along the way. So so I want to honor the depth of the work, but the weight of it. So anybody want to share first?
I'd be happy to. I love the way you've put this list together. It's really helpful to sort of see it all in black and white like this. One of the real focuses for me that is letter D, developing board goals that are focused on equity and inclusion. And that includes the policies. I mean, that's something that's been near and dear to my heart for years. And the structures for students and families and communities. The diversifying the board is absolutely crucial, because I've seen what happens when we have a board member of color and how that grabs the community and brings them in, and we get so much better communication to and from that community. And while the mentoring piece seems really important, to get people to run, I also think there's got to be an education component to our community about why having a diverse board is so important. Because I feel like that's the piece that we've missed a couple of times now, where we have encouraged people of color to run for the board, but they haven't gotten elected, because this is an elected position. It's not like we just get to choose board members that we like. And so while we and the school system may understand why having a diverse board is important, I think it's really important that our community understands why having a board that represents the community is so important. And so I think one of the outreaches that we as a board need to do is that education component to our community. So that's just that's my first thought.
So I enjoyed our time together, Tara and John, and I think you captured everything very well. Very extensive list, which it was kind of overwhelming at first. Like, wow, there's a lot. So I took kind of bullet the A, B's, C's, and D's from each. Actually, I'm sorry, there's capital and small. I kind of took one or two from each as priorities. But just to piggyback onto Jill, I'd like to see us do some kind of, I think most people, you know, the ballots, the voters pamphlet doesn't really provide much information about people. It's hard to know who to vote for. And so, you know, we might want to brainstorm around things we can do in terms of maybe have a little bio or something. I don't know what's legal or anything, but you know how we have the question Q&A that Broadway Rose sponsors. Maybe we can do something similar virtually, but also have a little something write up or something on each person that's different than the voters pamphlet. I don't know, but so that's an idea, and maybe just have a forum around maybe a few forums on what it takes to be a board member, like what do you do and how much time does it take and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I probably don't have time to go into each one, but and then policies, I'd like to see us make consistent some of the other policies. I know we were talking about reviewing the equity policy, but also taking what we are doing with the anti-bias policy and maybe applying it to some of the other policies as well, the AR part. For develop and transform board culture, I would love to see some of this stuff built into our working agreements. And also for D, create welcoming, inclusive, I'd like to see us reduce some of the barriers to entry for board members. And then on B, I'd like, I know we probably could do this over time, but I'd really like to focus on A for us as a starting point. And then equity coaching, I volunteer. I'd love to have that available. And then E, yes, I agree that we should prioritize. And I'm hoping we can get to that after we do the work tonight and improving the board, the goals. So that's all. That's what I wanted to say, but thank you.
Okay, well, a couple of them stood out for me also, and that was for the learning that we developed for DA, developing a deep and shared understanding of key concepts, because I do feel that that's important, that we're all talking the same language, so that when we are reviewing and developing the equity focused policies, which was also one that I circled, I feel like that will make that work maybe easier or maybe just smoother. So those were the two that I circled. But after listening to Sharon, I agree that part of A kind of does hint at the working agreements. So maybe that's where that kind of work could end up. And that I do think we're doing E or attempting E tonight. And yes, I will volunteer for coaching as well, because talking with John and Tara was a wonderful experience.
I'll go next, Ben. You can close up. And then students too, Rowan, Eddie, Emily, I don't think you participated in the interviews, but things that you've observed, right? You guys are really intelligent students. So please feel like, hey, this is what I see, and this is where I think would be important as we move forward. The things that I agree, absolutely, equity coaching and the tools. Tara, you said, I think kind of a bullet point at some point on the equity work and digging into what is that data that would help us kind of explain what we're trying to do and the tools to get us there. And in some of the conversations that we've had with parents, something that really stayed with me, and I think I'm not going to speak for Ben, but we had this conversation, is this sense that equity is separate, and we've talked to Dr. Sue about that too, right? Is that whole communication of why equity is an aspect of academic excellence, and that there is no wanting to slow any student down from their potential, right? And how do you work through the struggle, but keep lifting them up? And that all these pieces come together. And what I want to see as a board, that we're really able to articulate that to our communities well, and then defend it with the steps and the data that we're using to say, this is what we're doing, and we're doing that on track. And I know that Dr. Sue is very passionate about that. You're going to see that in her work. But as a board, we're united in those conversations and why we stand together on why this work is so important. So that's just a real focus for me, is just really getting to the core and the why and the data that helps us, really solidify to our communities and tell that community story on why we're really finding this as a priority. And absolutely the equity coaching. I greatly appreciate the time that I had with John and Tara. And while I am trying to read and listen and watch so many things, how you apply that and really live your life on a daily basis, always tremendous opportunities for me to learn. So, but really appreciate the framework on all aspects. So that's it. And Ben, and then students too.
Yeah, a lot of what the other directors have said has resonated with me. I was actually thinking very similarly to what Maureen just said, which is there's almost like two parts of this, which is, what we want to do as a board in terms of development and professional learning and growth and increased understanding, but then also how can we bring the community at large with us and kind of share that education and growth to broader circles than just the five of us. So that is on my mind as something important. I did just want to say out loud, I guess, some hesitation, not with the goal of diversifying the board, but wanting to be really careful about how we do that and avoiding any explicit or implicit appearance of the district favoring candidates in elections. I know that it's just a really tricky subject. We want to diversify the board. And for me, what that means is each of us as individuals have a responsibility and an ability to act as private citizens and as elected officials, but want to be really careful that what we do and say as a board and as a district is not in any way favoring one candidate over another in an election. Because I think we all deeply believe in democracy and want to respect the processes we have in place. So I did just want to surface that as something that I'm trying to think through exactly and say out loud. But also wanted to say thanks to John and Tara. And I think I would love the opportunity to have some equity coaching along the way as well, and think I would benefit tremendously from that. And I think of the five that we've discussed, those first two resonate as really important and also really not easy to do, but things that we could begin implementing relatively quickly by working together and talking together and continuing these sessions. So thank you again, and I'll open it up to student board members if they want to chime in.
For diversifying the board, I think I share some of the hesitation that Ben has, where we don't want to step into tokenism and only wanting the people of color and board members of color there because of the fact that they are people of color. And I think that's so important. That's something I think I talked about in my interview, is the fact that we never want to step into that category where people feel like the only reason that they are there is because of their skin color. And that's I'm sure is going to be a delicate topic to be discussed. For C, create systems and structures for partnering with students. I think you can read it. So it's just super hard to reach out to students during a pandemic. And I think it's revealed an aspect of students that they could hide when they were in school, because now we see more of the socioeconomic circumstances played out in the learning from home, rather than students coming to school and able to shed that part of them away. So I think it's going to be hard to do that, but it's important, and the board do need to put a lot of work into reaching out. I think, yes, we should definitely clarify the board role and engagement and oversight. I think once you really show the community that equity is your number one priority, you're going to see an outpour of student voice and community voice. I don't think anyone would hesitate from, voicing out their opinions if you are showing that this is your priority and this equity and inclusion is Tigard-Tualatin, what we are striving towards. And last part, I think the word accountability is something super important to us, because to students, a lot of the issues that we have voiced out against, so sexual assault, racism, and SROs, is really comes down to one word, which is accountability. Yeah, I think we just want to see the data. I think we want to see people held accountable for their actions. I know it's going to be hard, but it really is at the core of what students want from adults. So I think those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Emily.
I totally agree with Emily. She just took everything that I was about to say. But good job.
Yeah, I would agree as well. And I definitely agree diversifying the board has to be a huge goal. And as both Emily and Ben talked about, there are a lot of things that we have to balance to make sure that we are keeping the idea of democracy, as well as making sure that we are doing our best to create opportunities for everyone to participate. And that will be hard, but I definitely think it's completely worth it and necessary to go through all of that struggle.
Okay, thank you all. At this point, John and Tara, I mean, it's a lot. So how do you suggest that we kind of do a resort, prioritize, kind of walk forward, next steps? And then Dr. Sue, if you wanted to share anything, I want, to give you that opportunity as well.
I'm just seeing if I can wait longer than Tara. We'll see who goes first.
Oh, you can go ahead. I noticed you unmuted your mic, so I was waiting for you. So take it away, sir.
So to move into very clear priorities, especially focusing on the next 6 months, as Chair Wolf talked about. Clearly, the culture of the board is something that is foundational. So that needs to be right now, and it's not like it's brand new. You're already doing this, but to do that in a very intentional way, and I know Tara and I can support you in that in terms of agreements and questioning and having uncomfortable conversations and listening and accessing the voice, finding systems and ways to access students and families and staff and community. That's something that is emerging, I think, as an important immediate priority for the next 6 months. And then the learning, I think, coming up with a learning plan for the board. So Tara and I have identified several components of a learning plan, but we probably need the board to identify what's most important. Do you start with key concepts? Do you actually start with more deeply understanding the experiences of students of color and families of color? Is that part of the learning? Do you And again, but that's something that the board needs to really identify. These are the 3 or 4 most important things, and we can help come up with a sequence and support you in that learning. So I'm just addressing two pieces of the priorities, kind of immediate and next steps for the next 6 months. Tara?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with everything you said, and just add that, as you are identifying your priorities, know that many of these components will be a part of it. And I'll give you a key example. And talking about diversifying the board and hearing the feedback and the concerns about that, one thing that I'm super excited about is the conversations we had with directors around diversifying the board kind of moved away from that tokenistic type of conversation. And we were really looking at structure and those institutional barriers that keep or make it difficult to recruit a more diverse pool of folks for the board of directors, and from them advancing in the process. So using that as an example, let's say that's an area that you decided to prioritize. We absolutely would still have to talk about key terms, historical context, issues of tokenism, and how to bring the community along in this conversation. So it isn't just about tokenism or even the perception of that, and that people understand that it's more than just this upcoming election cycle, but really disrupting and making it a more inclusive process for years to come. So that's just one example of how whatever you prioritize, all of these components have to be a part of it if it's going to be sustainable and transformation. So don't feel like it's like this tug of war of, well, if I choose this, we'll lose this. No, they're all integral. And yes, there are opportunities to do deeper dives in some areas, but all of it has to be covered to some degree. And it's a work in progress, because even as you identify your priorities, depending on what emerges over the next 6 months, we may have to do some pivoting anyway. So just, identify your priorities, but don't feel like you're locked in or you're missing out on something. We're going to make sure we have everything that we need to be as successful as possible in this endeavor.
So you guys, just for fellow board members for next steps, what I would like to propose is, I think that I'm sure that John and Tara were taking notes as I was, as well as you were listing kind of your areas of greatest interest or priority. But board members, if you could send that again, kind of that focus, send it to Patty, and then I'd like to recommend that Vice Chair Bowman and I meet with Tara and John to kind of set a framework based on that. And this could be, iterative, right? To like, okay, this is what we think. Here's a timeline, give it to you guys, and get feedback, right? So that we really all agree. But just from a process, I think it would be most effective and efficient if Ben and I do that direct conversation with John and Tara. So I just want to look for thumbs ups or, head nods. And then again, there'll be a continual communication process. Okay. So we will do that with Dr. Sue and head that, forward as a subcommittee, I guess, or exec committee, and do that. So, I mean, we have certainly, it's 5:47. So John and Tara, any other ideas, board members, questions, anything that we should be mindful of before we kind of head off and try to figure out what our plan is for this work?
I do have a question that I'm curious if John and Tara might be able to weigh in, putting you on the spot a little bit here. But so this idea of including the community in some of the education work that we do, or kind of, obviously the focus of our work is internal with the board. But curious if you've had experience where you've sort of done, I don't know if it would be in tandem or is it a separate thing to sort of, because some of our goals obviously require community understanding and stakeholder support. So I'm just curious if you've thought at all or have any thoughts on how that piece of this might be incorporated in our work plan moving forward.
So I think that's a really important question. And I actually think the response to it is complex. So I'm just thinking of one piece of it. So this is not a comprehensive response, but it is about, partnering in the learning with students and families and community is so important. And the district is already doing some of this in terms of, listening sessions, and in terms of making the board meetings accessible, but getting even better at that in terms of outreach. So the school district is doing affinity groups with students and listening sessions and partnerships with families, so board members can participate in those. But the board can also do some of its own work around outreach and around listening and creating sessions, where the public and students, can testify to the board. I've worked closely with one district for many years, and they're very consistent around, public testimony. But they don't just open the space, they actually do some outreach and encourage people to come and speak and share their voice and share their experience. So that's just one piece of that comes up for me. Tara?
I also really appreciate that question. And honestly, it's something I have to think about a little bit more, because part of the complexity and the tension in that is, in the learning space as board directors, there needs to be space for you to do your learning and processing and not have to, constantly be on call to respond. And so there's a space for that. And then there's also a space to learn and process together in community. So, exactly what that could look like, I've got to brew on a little bit more. And I think that there's possibilities. And I think also, to just going along with John said, to really support the structures that you already have in place and strengthening those, that would probably be the best way to move forward in this initially. But definitely something to think more about. Those are just my first thoughts.
I appreciate that. Thank you both.
Any other comments from anyone? Okay, Zinnia, I don't see you now. Oh, there you are. Oh, yes. I don't know, Zinnia, I just want to thank you for really, kind of coordinating and organizing this for us. And I didn't know if you wanted to share anything or give your perspectives as we move forward.
I just want to offer one thing, is that, as this is very heavy work, and I am very proud of our district to know that our board is committing to this. And also, I want to make sure that we understand the depth of work that's needed. And I think the time that's going to be necessary to really build those systems of feedback loop. I think about our equity pillars, and we developed that like 5 or 6 years ago. And now is the first time we actually are operationalizing the affinity groups for students and for families. And that was 5 or 6 years in the making. And so I just want to make sure that we keep that in mind as we do this work.
And Rowan and Emily, and I want you guys to know, as Ben and I kind of put this together, you are tremendous advocates for the students in your schools. And so how we ensure that we are integrating the three of you in this work, that's front of mind for me as well, as we look at board work. But what are those aspects where you guys need to be really integrated in what we're doing? So Dr. Sue, anything you want to add?
Only how grateful I am to be able to work with a board that is committed to this work and committed to doing this level of deep learning. I echo what Zinnia said, is that to bring this to fruition in terms of taking the theoretical and making it the way that we live is both impressive and it's daunting at the same time. And, as I look through the list of the things that you shared with John and Tara, there were absolutely no surprises, excuse me, in terms of commitment to children, commitment to families, commitment to community, and understanding that for us to be able to close the achievement gap, we have to address the lived experiences of all of our children and wrap ourselves around that. And what I also appreciate is that in this moment is the way in which you also take on the role of an educator and helping our community to understand as you are doing the work. And I'm hopeful that the community comes to see that as you are grappling and having those courageous conversations and difficult conversations, is that is your work. That is what you are to do. And then how that plays out in an individual vote, that is what you can be held accountable for. But the conversation, the thinking together, the doing the work together, that is your work. And please know that you have my support and the cabinet's support as you're doing that in terms of how valuable that is to our entire work. And we're hopeful that the community comes to learn more about how boards operate as you do that work, and you do it in the fishbowl that we have come to know and love over the last many months. But it is messy work, but it is the right work to be doing. So we stand ready to support you in this work this year.
Well, thank you all. Well, then I think at 5:55, without my glasses on, I think we will go ahead and adjourn our work session. In short order, next steps, I'll get going on coordinating a time for the 5 of us to meet and kind of outline where we're headed, and then certainly get that communicated out. But I want to thank you all for participating in the work session, and see most of you back in about a half an hour. So.